Hi, and welcome to the Behavioral Business Blueprint, where we dive into the world of behavioral health entrepreneurship. Today's guest has been in the field working with health and substance abuse care since 1979. He grew his company from scratch to now 1,800 employees. Brian Nystrom, welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
I have been stalking your LinkedIn. I'm not sure how I ran into you. I mean, you have done a lot. So first thing I do want to ask is, how did you even get into this field of substance abuse and just mental health?
Well, I used to say it's my wife's fault, but but, but I had to reframe that because it sounded blaming. So really, I'm thankful to my wife. And the brief story is that when she and I met, she had been in a 5 year domestic violence marriage,
Hmm.
and as a very young guy, we're going back to the late 70s here. It's a very young guy. I had never heard of this before. It was just like a two by four hitting me across the head. So I began to learn about domestic violence. And back then it was kind of the silent crime. There was a lot of shame and stigma, especially for women around that. And so we kind of turned that, um, well, we started dating and got married and all that, but we turned our passion into how can we help women and kids that have been in these relationships. So we helped start two shelters for battered women and their kids in Minnesota in the late 1970s.
Wow,
Uh, so,
that's
so that that's
amazing.
so I, that's kind of how I got going. If we hadn't met, I would have gone a whole different route. So that's how I got into the mental health, substance use disorder field.
So you were saying it was the silent cry back in the 70s, and with you being in the substance use disorder world now, do you consider that the silent cry now, or is it still um, is it something else that you see as a silent cry that's going on?
Wow. Well, so stigma has gone way down. So I remember back in the early 80s, I got a phone call from a potential male client saying, Brian, I'd like to come in and do therapy with you. Do you have a back door? And I said, what do you mean, a back door? I said, sure, we got a back door, but people come in the front door. He says, well, I don't want anybody to know in my small community that I'm coming in to help you because for a man to come in back then, it meant he was weak. And he didn't want anyone to know that he had problems or was weak. So, anyway, I can tell you in the 45 years I've been in this industry, it's almost 50-50 now. Back then, it was like 80-20, maybe 85-15 women to men coming in. Now it's close to 50-50, and men have no problem coming in saying, I want to talk about some issues, marriage problems, whatever it is. So it's definitely changed. Even in the substance use disorder world, um, and just true confession, I have been clean myself for 14 years. I quit drinking February 1st of 2010. One of the best decisions I made besides marrying my wife was quitting alcohol.
Congratulations, 14 years. That's a long time. Long time. Wow, 14 years. So, I am very curious. 1,800 employees. So you started back in the 70s. What possessed you just to keep growing? That's a lot. Like, where do you start to even
Well,
grow that big?
yeah, so I can tell you that was never the intention. The goal was never to get big. And so, backing up a little bit in the 1980s, that's where I really kind of got my feet wet in the industry. Um, I worked in hospitals, psychiatric units, emergency room, behavioral assessments. Did worked in outpatient mental health clinics, that kind of thing, and really got kind of a feel. And it was very different back then compared to today. The industry was not developed back in the 80s, and but in the late 80s, I worked for a guy. I started several clinics for him in a particular area of the Minneapolis, St. Paul area. And long story short, Arthur, I loved what I did. I could do therapy all day. I mean, I would do 12-hour days, and I had energy left when I'd go home to do chores and things like that. And but part of the problem was when you're kind of like a workaholic, like I was back then, you missed some of the things, the cues that were going on. And kind of what was going on, turns out the owner was doing some, well, let's just say some billing practices that got him in trouble.
I've heard that one.
Yeah. And so this company called Blue Cross Blue Shield gave him a call and said, we're going to claw back a bunch of money from you, the clinic owner. And so it also turned out he was dipping his hands in our pockets of the clinicians. And so I finally woke up to that, contacted him, and I said, what are you doing? You can't do this. And he said, I said, let's sit down and talk this through. And he said, Brian, this is not about Christianity. This is about business. And I knew at that moment that I had to cut ties with him. He went out of business. Blue Cross Blue Shield basically shut him, put him out of business. Some employees took him to court for, I guess it would be embezzling from the therapist. So he went out of business. That's what caused me to start the clinic from scratch. So I said to my wife, I can't do this for this guy anymore. He's not honest. He's not straight up. He's hurt a lot of people. So she says, why don't you do something? I said, okay. So we started in 1991 from scratch. And I honored my non-compete with this guy who was doing unethical things. I'm still going to be ethical with him. So I said, okay, I'll compete right across the county line. And we opened up a shop. A couple guys came with me. I said, you have to honor your non-compete because it's the right thing and I don't want to get into legal trouble. So we had maybe myself and two other therapists to start. And our vision was just to have a straightforward, honest, transparent business where we would share all information with employees. It also had a faith-based perspective for those clients who wanted a faith-based perspective. If they didn't want a faith-based perspective, that was fine too. And we just wanted to do the very best we could do for our clients and employees. And guess what? It started growing organically. We weren't even trying. It wasn't even the goal. We started with a small square footage footprint. Well, then we had to expand that. So I called the landlord. Hey, we need some more space. Okay, we'll figure something. Anyway, we kept doing that. And finally, the building, 3-story building, ran out of space. So he said, can we buy the building?
Oh my
I'd never
goodness.
bought a building before. And so he said, sure. Apparently some German prince owned the building. So he had to get permission from the German prince. True story. Apparently Germans own a lot of office buildings in the Midwest. I didn't know that. And they own this particular building. Anyway, the guy from Germany came over. We shook hands and he said, I understand you want to buy my building. I said, yeah, I'd love to. He said, sold. You can buy it. Fair price, everything. So then we started adding other locations. Again, it was how can we serve more people? And back then, you got to remember, mental health was still in its infancy, as far as I'm concerned. It was very oh, what's the word? There was a lot of space for providers. And so I had one guy call me up in a central Minnesota saying, Brian, I'm moving out of state. Would you like to take over my clinic? I said, I'm sure I can't afford it. He said, I won't charge you a penny. It's yours. You can just have it.
Oh wow.
Yeah. I said, okay. I said, okay. And I had heard of the guy. He had a very good reputation, honest Christian guy. And I said, sure, so I went up there, met the several therapists that he had. We got along great. And that was just kind of put in my lap, you know. And then we developed that over time. We added more space. We bought a building. Then we bought a bigger building because it got big. And we kept doing that. The other thing, Arthur, that, kind of differentiated us, and this was not some brilliant business plan, but kind of growing up in the hospital industry, the psychiatry, inpatient, emergency room, all that, I got to see I worked in a multidisciplinary team. So we had medical doctors, psychiatry, nursing, dietitians, everything. And I thought, people are complicated. Why aren't we doing this in the outpatient world? When people come in, they have other needs too, besides just talk therapy. Talk therapy is great, but it's not everything.
Hmm.
So we added psychiatry. We added psychological and neuropsychological testing because, especially for psychiatry, they needed that to really understand what is the real diagnosis, what's causing what. Before I prescribe these medications, I, the medical provider, have to know what I'm targeting. And to do that, I got to know what the accurate diagnosis is. So it really got into differential diagnosis, why that testing is so, so important. We added DBT. Before DBT became cool, we were doing it. I read Marsha Linehan's book, and I said we would be idiots not to do DBT. So we started doing DBT as well, became the first certified DBT program in Minnesota to do it. Then we also got into community programs. So I would meet a lot with county social service people because as an MSW, I kind of had a community feel.
Hmm.
I looked at the whole community, and the person is in a family, they're in a community, a neighborhood, and so forth. So I thought, we get all kinds of people, and we worked with everybody. I mean, every kind of ethnic and racial group that existed in the Twin Cities. We had immigrants coming in from Sudan, Vietnam, and so forth, and so we created through the state a community-based program. They called it Adult Rehabilitative Mental Health Services, where a master's level therapist will go into the home, apartment building, wherever that client lived, even if they were in a homeless encampment. They would go to the homeless encampment. Yeah. Um,
You don't see that a lot these days. I mean, I see it on TV out in California, but I don't see that. I'm here in Florida. I can't say that I see a lot of people that go to the homeless encampments, which is
yeah.
needed because they're
Yeah.
homeless a lot of times because of different mental things going on.
Well, my view was they're human beings.
Hmm.
And, it's complicated. How do people become homeless? I've seen a number of people become homeless, not fault of their own. Um, and so, how do you help them? How do you kind of give them a hand to give them a hand up, if you will? Not a hand out, but a hand up. We also worked in prisons and jails. So, again, it was that perspective. Yes, we're an outpatient clinic, but we also are in the community.
Is there
So,
anybody at this time helping you with this? Is your wife involved or family members that are just giving you these
so
ideas?
yeah, my kids will tell you that they're all grown up now. They have memories when we were what's called bootstrapping, when you don't have any money. Uh, so we bootstrapped it, and we would stuff envelopes to mail out statements as a family. We'd sit down at as a family, we'd eat dinner, and then I'd pull out these boxes of statements saying, "Okay, kids, we're gonna fold envelopes and put them in the or fold statements and put them in the envelopes and mail them out." So and I taught them this is mailing a statement. You know, the services have been rendered; they owe a balance due. This is what a business does. And so trying to teach them at the same time, not only you have to work, but you have to understand business as well. And so they all worked in the business. They worked at the front desk. They waited on clients coming in. And then I had one son who stayed in the business. He got his MBA. And then he became, as it got bigger, the chief development officer. And he was kind of the lightning rod. He really wanted to grow things. And so he had that energy. And so we went from the one clinic in 1991, I think it's today like 62 clinics, something like that, in 5 states.
Wow. Wow.
And then one residential 54-bed facility for substance use disordered patients. And then all the community-based programs as well. So it's very vibrant. There's over 1,100 clinicians with a total of 1,800 employees.
I'm sure you thank your wife every day. I'm glad that was like the catapult to this. That's amazing to hear that, and I love that you have your family involved because we have a business. My wife and I'm always wanting to talk to other people that have businesses just to learn, like, how did you get your kids involved, to at least expose them. They might not want to do this, but at least show them this is how things get done in a business. So to hear how you simple as sitting down statements. I know
We just
now
made
it's
it real normal. We just made it real normal to them when they were young, just saying, "This, we're all going to do this." You know, it wasn't a choice. We just said, "We're going to do this," and they loved it.
I'm gonna remember that one and find ways to get my kids involved, any way I can. I mean, what you've done for the community, do you get a lot of calls for consulting these days to help other people? Because I see you on a couple of boards over the years.
Correct. Yeah. So I also helped hundreds of clinicians get their license. So I was their clinical supervisor as well. I would hear their cases, give them guidance, and then I would sign off on their licensing. So I still get those folks contacting me saying, "Hey, Brian, remember I was in your group in whatever year it was. Will you sign off on my licensing?" I've got people from around the country actually that contact me. And yes, so I'm on several nonprofit boards. Um, our company is obviously a for-profit, but I'm also on nonprofit board. So I've scaled back, and another group kind of runs the day-to-day operations. And then I went back and thought, what do I want to do, Arthur, when I grow up? And so I said, I'm going to go back to school again.
Again?
So I'm finishing a doctorate program and just finished my dissertation. It was on a trend analysis of intimate partner homicide-suicides in the United States.
That's a complex topic. Yeah, I can't say I hear that all the time. I can see a correlation. What made you interested in that? Was it just from what you've experienced in the beginning before you were married
Yeah.
yourself?
So we've been passionate about domestic violence to help figure out ways to stamp it out, if you will, whether it be homicide suicide is obviously the most violent form of domestic violence, right? And it's
Yes.
typically 95% of the time it's the man killing the woman, and typically he's using a gun. And many times he'll also take out the new boyfriend, that kind of thing, or the kids as well. So to me, it's an important topic because it's trying to get into the mind of the man. Why? Why do you have to do this? Right? We don't have to be violent as men. We can be strong and loving, but we don't have to be violent. So this problem persists in our society. It cuts across all socioeconomic groups. Everyone is prone to it to some extent. So that's what intrigued me about it. Um, we also part of the whole domestic violence thing. I've been on board of directors of a shelter for battered women, but also we did this thing called Walk a Mile in Her Shoes. Maybe you've heard of it. Maybe some of your listeners have heard of it. It's where men will wear red high heel shoes and walk a mile. So we would organize a march. We had over 750 people march a mile. We had police officers, highway patrolmen, you name it, in their uniforms wearing red high heel shoes. The point of the red high heel shoes was it was symbolic, right? It was to say, you walk a mile in her shoes. And of course, we can't as men, but we can try to imagine it. And it was to bring attention to what women go through that are going through these awful domestic violence relationships, which, by the way, in our clinical practice, we also see it where men can carry the abuse into the courtroom. So a guy who's not the loving, kind husband that he should be, if he's abusive and has power and control, he can carry that into the courtroom and mess with a woman through the legal process and mess with the kids and so forth. So part of it too is trying to figure out better ways to do child custody when there is substantiated domestic violence going on. So we see that a lot with our clients.
Yeah, just because you mentioned that, I think about we have a group home. I think about the kids that we take in. I think about some different cases and who got custody because a lot of people always think that it's the mom that gets custody, and I said that's not true. It's sometimes it's the dad gets custody, and it might not necessarily be the best thing, but it's interesting to see how that always plays out. But you had me thinking about a lot of things I haven't heard. I thought I knew what walking out in our shoes was, but I can't say I've seen the heel part of it. So that's a lot because that's a mile. Imagine that's going to catch some people's attention. They're going to want to know what's going on. But I don't want to take up too much more of your time. But I
Yeah.
do want to ask you if you can give any advice to anybody that wants to start a business in the behavioral health field. What would be that advice for them?
Well, first of all, in the behavioral health industry, anybody can do it. You can be as small as a one-person private practice shop, right? So technically you're in business, right? What anybody has to really think about if they're going to do a solo practice, for example, is you're going to not only be the therapist, but you're going to be the appointment maker, the scheduler. You got to collect the money, you got to bill it, you got to clean the bathroom, you got to make the coffee, you got to clean the break room. So I just point that out. It's nice to work in an organized clinic where all that's done for you, but there are folks that want to be independent, and that's great, and they should, but just keep that in mind. The other thing I would just say to anybody is if you're going to do a private practice, minimally do it in a group where you can get consultation. It's so important because we can all have impaired objectivity with some of our clients. We're missing things and things like that. So you need other people to share your cases with to some extent. And if you want to grow into a bigger entity, then make a plan. Write it down, write it out, talk to a few people maybe who've done this or trusted advisors. You're going to need legal help to set up the corporation. It's not hard to do. You're going to need a trustworthy accountant to guide you on the finances, things like that. But it's not that hard to do. But you have to have what I call the fire in your belly. In other words, you want to do this. This is a passion you have. And if you want to do it, do it. Just do it. Don't, don't wait year after year. Just do it.
I love that there. If people want to reach out to you, what's the best way that they can contact you?
People can reach out to me on my LinkedIn. Just find Brian Nystrom, and you'll find me.
Well, Brian, thank you for joining me today on the Behavioral Business Blueprints. And if you have any questions for my listeners, please just reach out to me on LinkedIn as well. Have a great day, y'all.